Here's a question for you. Were you ever really into a thing that no one else around you could understand? For me, it was this. It's a play called Happy Days, and I absolutely loved it during high school.
Another heavenly day!
And the thing is, it's literally just 2 hours of this woman stuck in the ground talking absolute nonsense. The most exciting moment of this play was this.
No more! Oh, bless you, Winnie, I do appreciate your goodness. I know what an effort it cost you. Now you may relax. I shall not trouble you again unless I'm obliged to. By that I mean unless I come to the end of my own resources, which is most unlikely. Just to know that in theory you can hear me, even though in fact you don't, is all I need. Just to feel you there within earshot and conceivably on the qui-vive is all I ask. Want to say anything I would not wish you to hear or liable to cause you pain, not to be just babbling away on trust as it is with not knowing and something gnawing at me.
None of my friends understood it at the time. They thought I was just being pretentious. Which, yeah, I get. But weirdly enough, it spoke to me. You see, Happy Days is made in the style of theater of the absurd. The most famous example of this genre has to be Waiting for Godot, also written by Samuel Beckett, in which, again, nothing at all happens. And that's the point. It's all premised on the philosophy of existentialism, which argues that life has no inherent meaning, that we are all thrust into this world and then we die, with no grander story being played out. This is the perfect philosophy for an angsty teen. These plays were an attempt at placing a mirror in front of the audience and saying, you don't know this, but this is what your life actually amounts to. The problem is, they were also incredibly boring. But again, that's the point. Now, for a while there, I felt like I moved past this philosophy, and this type of theater, especially as I became more politically conscious. It felt really silly, really navel-gazy, and just very privileged to bemoan our human condition when there were real injustices and struggles around me. I became much more drawn to accessible art that had very direct political messages, that engaged with their audiences instead of alienated them. But this video isn't about theater. You see, lately I've been reconnecting with existentialism from a different vantage point. I don't think it's controversial to say that we are all living through very existential times, and it has less to do with philosophy and more to do with the very basic facts of the world today. Even though it is the single worst thing that humans can do, genocide is increasingly becoming normalized, and there are numerous active genocides happening across the world right now, some that we're all seeing live streamed. And there's this strong feeling that, despite our best efforts, we can't stop them. And these genocides implicate not only the main aggressors in these situations, but also so many other states and organizations that are complicit in their silence and inaction. With that comes a collapse of any semblance of a collective moral order, what some people are calling ethicide. And on top of that, we are witnessing a global ascendancy of fascism and a tremendous capture of wealth by an increasingly small group of people. Meanwhile, we're all being impoverished, exploited, and overworked. And on top of that, we're all staring down the barrel of the climate collapse, which nothing is being done to prevent or prepare for it. And on top of that, 4 of the world's 9 nuclear powers are engaged in wars of aggression, which is pushing us ever closer to the possibility of a nuclear holocaust. It's no surprise that at the beginning of this year, the doomsday clock was moved to 85 seconds to midnight, the closest it's ever been. So there's plenty of reasons to be very existential in this moment, or in another way, to fall into despair and inaction. I've definitely noticed there's this pervasive feeling online that there's too much going on, and that people are basically checking out, that functionally they no longer care about Gaza, about Lebanon, about the climate, about ascendant fascism, etc., etc. Is it a kind of political burnout? Have people just given up? Or is it that people are just focusing on their own struggles or their own survival? Or is it something else entirely. My first existential phase, the more philosophical one, was sort of resolved by reading Albert Camus. In his book, The Myth of Sisyphus, he argued that although there's no inherent meaning to life, we can and must invent our own meaning. And for me, I think I found that through my writing, my organizing work, my relationships. I also found it in my understanding of how history and political progress work, in this kind of separate, often barely visible islands of resistance. In a way, this concept was very succinctly described by Martin Luther King Jr. in one of his most famous quotes. "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice." I thought all that also addressed my more political existentialism, but lately, I really don't know. I thought I had it figured out, but everything just keeps getting worse, and I don't see a light at the end of the tunnel. All of my actions feel absolutely meaningless, and just doomed to fail. And I'm sure it's the same for a lot of you as well. So, I want to talk about it. It might not seem like the most pressing thing, but I actually think it's messing up a lot of people right now, and basically hindering their ability to act, or even to think. And I don't think we can so neatly separate the psychology, the philosophy, and the material conditions we're living under. Lest we forget, this channel is called Politically Depressed. So, I want to try to clock the prevailing depressing mood at the moment, and see if there's any way out of it. But before I get into it, hello. Welcome to another one of my videos. If you like the work that I've been doing, and want to see more of it, then head over to my Patreon to become a paid member today. By becoming a member, you'll help me make more videos and hire people to help me with the research and editing, which means I'll be able to make more and hopefully better videos. Paid members also get access to Patreon-exclusive videos, usually shorter, funnier deep dives. They get a shout out at the end of my videos, and they can watch my videos ad-free on my Patreon. So, if you're able to, become a member today. Also, if you just want to give me a one-time donation, I've also got a tip jar. Both links in the description below. Now, let's get back to it. The very first essay I ever published was in late 2019, and was titled Depression and Revolution. I started that essay with a quote. "How do you throw a brick through the window of a bank if you can't get out of bed?" That line comes from the brilliant essay Sick Woman Theory by the writer Johanna Heva. It summed up so many of my conflicted feelings during a revolutionary time in Lebanon. There was a lot going on at the time, and for a lot of the, let's call it, spicier activities, I felt like I couldn't participate in them, even though I supported them wholeheartedly and believed them to be necessary actions in that moment. So, through that, I started to formulate an analysis that is basically the basis for my channel name. In that essay, I wrote, "Being depressed during a revolution means feeling despair even when people around me are elated. It means selectively choosing what street actions to take part in, if any. It means constantly calculating the impact the events I partake in will have on me, if it's worth the psychological toll. Or it can simply mean lying in bed, feeling worthless, and unable to overthrow the systems that I feel put me there in the first place." Now that last part is really important for me, because I really don't think you can easily separate material conditions and the power structures we live within from understandings of mental health and mental illness. Of course, genetics, brain chemistry, and our so-called childhoods all play a big role as well, but that's already well-trodden terrain. That is, the modern field of psychology focuses almost solely on those latter causes and mostly ignores the former ones. So, since what I'm describing is clearly a psychological problem, what can psychology offer us in this moment of genocide and fascism? I tried looking for some accessible, or as they say, public-facing knowledge production on how to cope with the present moment. I found two examples that sum up perfectly the problem I'm describing and the limits of contemporary psychology in dealing with them. Why the news feels overwhelming and how to cope. And outrage fatigue is real. These tips may help. They both basically say the same thing. Things are really bad, so you should take care of yourself. Take a break from social media. Volunteer to feel like you have some agency. You'll never see a headline reading, "Capitalists and fascists are destroying your world and your mental health. Here are 5 ways to overthrow them and restore your mental well-being." It may sound naive, but honestly, it really feels like anything short of that just feels like pissing in the wind. It's easier and more tangible to recommend breathing exercises or drugs that are empirically proven to change your mood. Now, I'm not saying it's all untrue and we should completely ignore it. I mean, I take drugs and do breathing exercises. You do have to take care of yourself. But those articles still feel so removed from what people are actually experiencing. A good example is that neither of them make any mention of the Gaza genocide, which has both created a wave of global solidarity and emotional despair. In fact, the APA, the American Psychological Association, still has not acknowledged that Israel, backed by the United States, is committing genocide in Gaza. I've talked a lot about this before, but my feeling is that the field of psychology as a whole is just totally unequipped to deal with this changing world, in large part because it denies the very reality we're living through. With that said, I have found a couple of things, here and there, that at the very least elaborate on what I'm trying to describe as political burnout. One of the very few Western psychologists I have found that dealt with this issue head-on was Robert J. Lifton. He coined the term psychic numbing to describe the way that people and societies tend to pay less attention to traumatic events, past or future, when the scale of it becomes too large. Lifton described psychic numbing as closely related to PTSD, which is actually also a diagnosis that he was instrumental in codifying. The exposure to traumatic events, be they natural disasters or a horrific war crime, even if witnessed from afar, can trigger the same fight or flight reaction, and over time cause a person to withdraw. This is where the numbing comes into play. And again, to emphasize, here I'm not talking about the people experiencing these events firsthand, but those witnessing it from afar. In the case of the Gaza genocide, I'm talking about all of the people across the world who have seen the gruesome images, listened to Palestinians describe their experiences, or watched videos day after day of Gaza in its entirety being flattened. And actually, there is some scientific evidence to suggest that even this prolonged exposure can actually have an effect on our brain chemistry. A study from 2003 was conducted with the title Habituation of Rostral Anterior Cingulate Cortex to Repeated Emotionally Salient Pictures. And people say academia is inaccessible. Anyway, the study basically consisted of showing 2 groups of people 2 different types of images. One group was shown blank or neutral images, the other gruesome and gory images. They did this to the same 2 groups 2 different times, all the while monitoring their brain activity. What they found was that the parts of the brain responsible for emotional regulation was less activated in the second round across the board, especially for those shown the horrifying pictures. What this suggests is that emotional response becomes desensitized with repeated exposure. Now, this is only one study, and it doesn't really look into long-term exposure and long-term effects, especially in a real-world setting. But I can't help see the parallels with it and so many of the horrific images we see on social media. And actually, Samah Jabr, the Palestinian psychiatrist, wrote about this exact thing in 2021, when describing the spreading of gruesome pictures that were coming out of Gaza at the time. She wrote, "Sometimes there are even worse psychological consequences to the traumatizing media content, such as the development of apathy and emotional numbness in the face of the blood and pain emanating from these images. In this way, such images lose their ability to produce any human reaction from their viewers, who calmly eat pizza while watching these images on TV. Now, on top of this, there's also another related aspect at play here. Another American psychologist, Paul Slovic, coined the term compassion fade. What it describes is that as the number of victims or of people in need of aid increases, people's likeliness to empathize decreases. Have you ever by any chance heard the phrase, "The death of one is a tragedy, but the death of a million is a statistic"? I've actually always thought that was a quote from Stalin, but turns out it's not. It's actually traced back to a French satirical newspaper in the 1920s in response to the casualties of the First World War. Regardless, I think if we understand that sentence from a psychological perspective, it basically describes what compassion fade is. People tend to be much more moved by individual stories and characters than they are by masses. Basically, as soon as one victim turns to two, our ability to empathize correspondingly decreases. A good way to explain this is with these two charts. The first chart demonstrates what I think most people think should be the case, that the value of each life is as important as the next. However, what compassion fade describes is more accurately depicted by this chart. As the number of victims rise, the value attributed to their lives does not increase proportionately. And so, every single day, dozens are killed by Israel in Palestine and in Lebanon. And it no longer makes the news, because it's no longer a novelty. Their deaths become a statistic. And from my own honest experience with all of this, try as I might, it is impossible for my heart to keep up with the ever-increasing scale of Israel's brutality. And this doesn't really feel like the easiest thing to talk about, because there's just so much shame attached to it. Like, of course, my feelings as someone living in the safety of Europe should not be centered, should not be the priority. But that doesn't change the fact that I need to figure it out. That we all do. That I think a lot of people are just less active, less able to think, less able to engage as much as they'd want to, or as much as they need to. And basically, I do think that what a lot of people are experiencing at the moment, even by just witnessing these things from afar, is a type of trauma response. And I don't think setting those feelings aside is doing anyone any good. At the moment, I'm feeling the most intense despair I've ever experienced in my life. And I can't get out of it. Everything feels so doomed. And some days, I really just can't get up. I'm crippled by grief for what's already happened and for what I know is to come. The tragedy is that if my own ability to get better is tied to the political realities around me, which are only slated to get worse, will I ever get better? I mean, to be fair, numerous therapists over the years have told me that this is simply not a healthy way to live. But I can't help myself. Now, I know this channel is called Politically Depressed, but I never wanted to preach despair as a conclusion. I've always wanted to talk about it, to acknowledge it, so that I can resist it, and hopefully in the process, help others do the same. So that brings us to the opposite of despair, the much dreaded word, hope. I can't stand hope. It has led me to so many disappointments, so much heartache. But then again, without hope, there's nothing. Sometimes when I feel like a drama queen, I want to shout, "Hope is dead, long live hope." But actually, that feels more like an idea for politically depressed merch than a serious slogan. What I think needs to happen is that we need to re-understand what hope means to begin with. And actually, there's this quote attributed to the Czech dissident, playwright, and politician Václav Havel that really helps with this reframing. Hope is not the conviction that something will turn out well, but the certainty that something is worth doing no matter how it turns out. Havel is also a really interesting figure, because he actually also wrote plays in the style of theater of the absurd. But instead of being a boring, apolitical exploration of the futility of life, it was a way to critique the bureaucracy of the regime he was living under. He combined his writing with grassroots organizing, ultimately leading to several incidents of imprisonment. It would be impossible for him to know, while languishing in prison, that only 10 years later, a revolution would overthrow the regime and that he himself would become president of Czechoslovakia. This presents us with a combination of existentialism, psychology, and political resistance. And actually, there is another person that I think best exemplifies this combination: Viktor Frankl. Viktor Frankl was an Austrian Jewish psychoanalyst who founded the school of logos therapy, meaning-centered therapy. In his book, Man's Search for Meaning, he described how it was hope and meaning that enabled him to survive the concentration camp. Of course, he acknowledges that the majority of it was luck, but he insists that it was his desire to rewrite his thesis, which was stolen from him by the Nazis, was what gave him the ability to continue on, while many other hopeless inmates perished. Now here I guess it's important to note that the meaning Frankl gave to his experience did not ultimately liberate the camps. It wasn't the reason the Nazi regime fell, but it was, as Frankl described, an essential tool in keeping himself alive, and thus resisting, even in a small way, the Nazi death machine. There, I think, is a path to understanding political hope in a new way. It's not a feeling, but a tool, something we need to learn how to use, especially in times where it feels like the odds are just so stacked against us. To this, the climate activist and writer Rebecca Solnit writes, "To hope is to accept despair as an emotion, but not as an analysis. To recognize that what is unlikely is possible, just as what is likely is not inevitable. To understand that difficulty is not the same as impossible." We should also always understand that we are in the midst of a long struggle, whether at a global level or right down to the micro scale. No matter what struggle you're a part of, whether for queer liberation or against imperial domination, there have been resistors and martyrs that have come before you. There are still countless resistors and martyrs, most of whom you will never know their names. And so I sometimes feel that I owe it to all of those who came before me to keep going on, to not give up. I owe it to everyone back home. I owe it to my mother, who deserves so much better than living through yet another war. I personally, as a writer, will never stop talking about the brutality and criminality of the State of Israel, even if it comes with risks and sacrifices, or even if talking about it does nothing. I will never stop standing up and supporting members of my community back home, even if we're all slated to die tomorrow. If not because it is the right thing to do, then I will continue doing it out of spite. Now, this might all feel good, but speaking alone has its limits. Same goes for posting online or awareness raising. We do need action on all fronts, but those types of actions, although necessary, honestly are often really scary. They're risky, and there's no assurances they'll work. So here, I'm reminded of the concept brought to us by the Black American revolutionary Huey P. Newton: revolutionary suicide. As a Black radical in the United States, Newton knew that he'd always had a target on his back, by white supremacists, by the police, and by the state, which are not necessarily mutually exclusive categories. In the face of this oppression, many in the Black community took their own lives. To Newton, he saw a need to intervene in this binary of struggle and death. "It is better to oppose the forces that would drive me to self-murder than to endure them," Although I risk the likelihood of death, there is at least the possibility, if not the probability, of changing intolerable conditions. This possibility is important, because much in human existence is based upon hope, without any real understanding of the odds. Indeed, we are all, black and white alike, ill in the same way, mortally ill. But before we die, how shall we live? I say, with hope and dignity. And if premature death is the result, that death has a meaning reactionary suicide can never have. It is the price of self-respect. This, of course, poses suicide in a new way, and broadens our very understanding of the term. Suicide is not just the taking of one's own life, but a casting of oneself into the unknown. It's accepting the death drive of the structures around us, be it capitalism or patriarchy, and acting accordingly. Newton continues, "Revolutionary suicide does not mean that I and my comrades have a death wish. It means just the opposite. We have such a strong desire to live with hope and human dignity that existence without them is impossible. When reactionary forces crush us, we must move against these forces even at the risk of death. We will have to be driven out with a stick." And so, all of this reminds me so much about Palestinian resistance, who are set against seemingly insurmountable odds, but they persist nonetheless. Again, Samah Jabr, the Palestinian psychiatrist, wrote about this when recounting the mortal risks protesters in Gaza were facing when they were participating in the Great March of Return in 2018. There is a difference between the psychological profile of a person who attempts suicide because of personal problems and the person who undergoes self-sacrifice in the context of social struggle. The suicidal person is hopeless and desperate, withdrawing from others pessimistically, or fearing to be a burden upon them. Suicidal actions are often egocentric because the individual's spark of life has lost its meaning in interpersonal terms. In contrast, the self-sacrificing person, even on the pathway to death, may be full of hope. Indeed, perhaps too much so. The act of self-sacrifice often involves an altruistic dedication to others and an eagerness to improve their future chances. Their hope is to extinguish their own soul in the service of giving light to others and brightening the road ahead. I think that's huge in and of itself. But I think for many of you out there, that might sound a bit extreme. These are, after all, contexts in which people have very few options left. So, for the rest of you out there, where you still do have some choice of action, I think you can consider suicide as a type of metaphor. The death of your former selves, your former lives, or killing once and for all the life you expected to lead, but are simply unable to manifest because of the violent and unfair structures we live under. But if you take away nothing else from this video, then let it be this. We must reckon with the despair of the present moment. But we cannot accept it as a conclusion. We, all of us, must find what nourishes our body and our soul, what pulls us out of that despair into action. And that action can take many forms. It could be movement building, it could be direct action, it could be mutual aid, or so many other things based on your context and struggles. But know that all around you, all across the globe, there are other people agitating, struggling, and resisting. And that your contributions may be small, but they accumulate and contribute to the long struggle. And so, like with all of my deeper dives, I don't know how to conclude. So instead, I'll end with one final quote, this time by Margaret Killjoy, a writer who I think writes better than anyone else I know today on political hope in our age of collapse and crisis. I find hope in everyone who is doing what they do best, whether through criminal or legal means, to refuse the new and somehow even worse status quo. It's happening everywhere. I never thought I'd live to see the day when so much of the world comes together to try to save each other. So, it's us. I find hope in us. And now, a message of thanks to my lovely patrons. Muhammad, Janet Robertson, Nibs beats Chow in a fair fight, Jake Demarest Mays, Existential Puffin, and many more. If you want to hear your name read out at the end of my videos, or seen it written as text, then become a member of my Patreon today. Not only do you get cool perks such as ad-free viewing and exclusive content, but you also help me make more videos. But if you're not able to become a monthly paid member, you can still give me a one-time donation in my tip jar. Both links are in the description below. Thank you, and I'll see you all next time.